Hello, it is that time of year. My name is Kylie, and today we're going to talk about books. Now, it was a really good reading year for me. I personally read about 135 books, which was the most I've hands down ever read. And although I primarily read across different genres, fantasy, horror, thriller being probably the top three that I read most frequently, I think it's time for a best of the best favorites of 2022 list. So I'm going to get started today. We're first going to start off with thrillers, since that is, again, one of the core genres I definitely read the most. So I'm going to tell you up front, I terrible at picking favorites. Absolutely awful. It changes because I'm a mood reader. It also changes what I think of them afterwards based on my mood, based on the day of the week, based on how much time has passed and how well I remember it. So I'm telling you guys up front, this is my top 5 favorite thrillers that I read in 2022, but with the full warning and heads up that there is no particular order to this. These are just my top 5 that I remember the most and I loved the most from the beginning of the year till now. All right, let's get started. The very first book we're going to talk about is, first off, on Kindle Unlimited. Great news for people that have Kindle Unlimited, like myself. Part 2, if you are on BookTok, which I feel a lot of us probably are, you will recognize this name. That's where I got the original recommendation. And honestly, after reading it, completely understand why and completely agree with the hype that it gets on BookTok all the time. So, that book is Still Missing by Chevy Stevens. That is the first one we're going to talk about. Now, Still Missing sounds very much as a just general description, like a lot of classic thrillers are. Essentially, the very light plot synopsis is it follows a realtor as she hosts an open house and from that point on gets kidnapped. And the whole rest of the book is not only following the initial kidnapping, but her captivity, the fallout, what happens around her as a result, and it's a lot. Let me tell you, I was expecting a pretty cut and dry, fairly repetitive, or almost a deja vu thriller of I've read several of these before that probably could all fit in this kidnapping subplot. And I was really surprised. It took turns that I wasn't expecting. It also, the way that it covers the story and the progression of the story was not what I was expecting. I thought it would primarily sit only around the captivity period, and I was pleasantly surprised that it didn't. And I was really intrigued all the way through the book. I will say, I don't think, for me in particular, and for those that have probably read thrillers pretty frequently and are familiar with the cadence and the pacing, I will say I don't think this is a thriller that necessarily has like the most gut wrenching plot twist you've ever read in your life. I wasn't fully surprised by the plot twist, but I also don't think that ruins or hinders the book in any way. I thought it was still a very good book and still very much adds to the tension and the confusion and the mixed emotions regardless. I would say if you want something that's kidnapping, absolutely dive into this. If you love that kind of a subplot, it's great. I really think this is one of the better ones I've read. I would say do check content warnings. There are definitely some things in there that could be sensitive to people, but absolutely a great book. Again, on Kindle Unlimited, absolutely worth your time to read. All right, next book, we're going to talk about the fourth book on the list. Again, in no particular order though. This one, everything stands the same. Also on Kindle Unlimited, which is great. This is an author that's also on BookTok, and she's really great to interact with on BookTok. So if you haven't, would recommend following her. She's really great. And I will say, I actually read more than one book by her this year, and I did like all of the books by her I did read. This is the one that was my particular favorite. However, I would say up front, I don't think there's a book you could choose by her and go wrong. And that is The Best of Friends by Lucinda Berry. So this one was good. I will also say, just like the last one, and probably most on this list, I absolutely would check content warnings before you go into this because it could be something that's sensitive in nature. And essentially, why is the synopsis, the plot of this one centers around three teenage boy best friends that have a tragic shooting accident one night while they are all hanging out together. And the additional layer to that is all of these boys' parents, the moms, are best of friends. They were friends growing up, they knew each other in high school. Some of their husbands are also people they knew in high school and interconnected in that sense. And so if you are sensitive to gun violence, do be very careful going into this one. However, that said, I absolutely loved this one. I read this book in one day, I think in 2 to 3 sittings. I thought it was very well paced. Again, there's really no element of mystery to this. Well, I take that back. There is a lot of mystery in this one. It's what happened the night of. I will say I didn't feel there were major plot twists in this one, but again, I didn't feel like it needed it. I felt like it took kind of general twists and turns, and that was plenty to keep me engaged, to keep me active. I was very involved in this. As someone who loves reality TV and drama, if you are in that zone, I do think you'll especially like this book because not only does it center around this tragedy they're trying to unwrap and understand, but it also definitely gives some of those Mean Girl, maybe Real Housewives vibes of, do these moms really like each other, and what are their relationships, and how are they interconnected as a group, and how that impacts their understanding of both their kids as well as trying to solve what exactly went down. So I will say I do think this one's very gripping. I think it's very dark, but in a very thrilling sense. And like I said, it had me hooked, hands down, start to finish. Absolutely would recommend this one. All right, moving right along, we're going to talk about the next one. And I will say, I do think this is one of my favorite, like top 10, regardless of genre, out of the whole year. I know I said I wasn't going to pick favorites, but this one really stuck with me. However, I will say, I think this one is probably one of two in terms of the more divisive options on the list. I have seen a lot of people love or hate, and not a lot of people in between this one. So let's break into it. Let's talk about why. And that book is A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw. If you love creepy, atmospheric books, this one's for you. I'm telling you, it's so good. She does creepy, spooky atmosphere like no other author that I've read. I mean, she is so good at it, and I would also recommend her book, Wicked Deep. It's more YA, but just, I didn't read it this year, so I'm not including it, but it is a good one too if you like that kind of spooky thriller vibe. So, A History of Wild Places, essentially what it does is it follows a man with psychic-like abilities whose job he takes it on himself to find missing people and can help locate them, reunite them with their family, or find closure depending on how the case ends. In this particular case, he takes on one final job to find a missing children's book author who she herself wrote really creepy books for kids, and those were kind of controversial, and therefore there was a lot of mystery surrounding her sudden disappearance. So he takes on this one final job, and then it just spirals from there. That's really the setup. I will say, hands down, if you loved The Village but wanted it done better, this is the book for you. If you absolutely hated The Village, like even just from a base concept level, you are not going to like this book. They're very similar, and that's why I say it's very divisive. But for me, I love this. I love the cult vibe. I love the influence, the fear-mongering, the culty leadership language, the moments where you ask yourself, what actually is happening here? I don't know. Did we jump in time? Did we jump in space? Is there something supernatural here? Or is this going to be a thriller based entirely in concrete reality? It's so fun. It asks a lot of questions. I will say I did not see the twist coming. I thought I had figured this book out. I really thought I had figured it out. I was completely wrong. And I loved it. I loved that I was wrong. It went somewhere I didn't expect. This one also has very short chapters, which, if you're like me with attention span problems sometimes, it's great. It's great. So, really couldn't say enough stuff about this one. I would highly, highly, highly recommend A History of Wild Places. All right, let's talk about the next one. This is the other one that I feel will be slightly divisive on this list, and I think that is primarily because this is a very suburban drama. So, if you like Desperate Housewives, if you like Real Housewives of reality shows, I think you'll like this one. If not, I would skip this one if I'm being honest. So, this one is also available on Kindle Unlimited, and it is Every Last Secret by A.R. Torr. This author has a couple books on Kindle Unlimited. This is the first one I read, and honestly, I was pleasantly surprised. I really liked it. I will say I do agree with the general criticism that most of the characters in this book is unlikable. I would agree with that. It's pretty true. But I also don't think that completely turned me off of the book. I, if anything, was so obsessed with their slight level of unhinged that they all had that I was rooting and dying to see who was going to do what next. And to be honest, I didn't even know who I was rooting for most of the time, but that's what made it fun. It's a short one. It's a pretty easy read. I will also say I do think the plot is slightly more predictable than some of the other ones on the list. However, again, I don't think that disrupts the enjoyable aspects of this book. I really liked it regardless. Again, I just live for unhinged suburban drama and thought it was so fun. Essentially, what this one is it follows a couple who's very well established and very wealthy in this neighborhood, and their goal is to have kids upcoming when all of a sudden the new neighbors next door move in who are also a couple, and the wife in particular, who is very gorgeous, now works very closely with the original couple's husband. So tensions arise, jealousies arise, questions arise. There's a lot of classism, there's a lot of prejudice involved. It's fun. It's not super deep, but I don't think it needs to be. And I really enjoyed it, so would recommend. And here we go. We're at the final one. Now, I will say I read this one earlier in the list, and while I tend to have some recency bias, this one has stuck with me. Even reading it several months ago, I absolutely loved this one. I thought it was great. And honestly, I mean, is it a thriller list if you don't include this author? I don't think you can go wrong with any books by this author, but this one in particular that I really loved and stuck out to me this year was The Last Widow by Karen Slaughter. I thought this was great. Up front, I will say this is part of a series, the Will Trent series. However, the really nice thing is you don't have to have read the previous installments to fully understand. I haven't. I came in completely blind, didn't even realize it was part of a series, and loved it. Didn't think there was any learning curve, didn't think there was a lot thrown out that I didn't understand. I was very much invested in this start to finish, regardless of the fact that it was a series. So, fantastic. I would say this one in particular, also kind of like A History of Wild Places, does deal with cult extremist groups, that language, the persuasion, the fear mongering people use. As you can see, clearly I have a favorite subgenre, and that is it. So if you really like that stuff, I think you'll also really enjoy this book. I also feel like those that like the Jack Ryan, Jack Reacher, those types of installments where it's a little more action-based thrillers and more government involvement, you will really like this. That very much gave me the vibes when I was reading through. Like I said, very similar to Jack Ryan, Jack Reacher, both of those. And in a great way. I mean, it reads like a thriller movie in my mind. That's how it goes. It's very cinematic. The pacing is fantastic. It's very fast paced. Kept me hooked all the way through. I absolutely loved this one. Again, you really can't go wrong with picking a Karen Slaughter book, but this is one of the ones I would recommend personally, and I'm really excited to read the rest of the Will Trent series because this one hooked me. That does it. That's the very first wrap of the year. I will have a top 5 horror, and I'm going to also do a top 5 fantasy. So stick around for those. Make sure you check them out. Let me know in the comments what your favorite ones were, or if you strongly disagree, let me know too. I know, again, some of them could be a bit divisive. I am also on TikTok under 60-second book reviews. You can see it there. Follow me, join, and I would love if you'd subscribe to this channel.